Thank you for
I'm good.
joining
How
me.
are you?
Okay, it's nice to meet you. I have an icon of you, and there you are.
Okay.
So I appreciate your time today, Sarah.
Oh
And I
yeah, I'm
want to,
happy to do it.
yeah, I just want to introduce you to the community. I talked about it a little bit before you got here that you write for Al Jazeera English, and Foreign Policy named you as one of the 100 to follow to make sense of global events. So
Hmm.
if you can make sense of this globe, kudos to you, Sarah. And
Yeah, I'll try.
and of course, it's ladies' choice, and you want to discuss the presidential race here in the U.S. And I assume that your PhD in anthropology helps you break it down in this political season.
Oh
As
yeah,
you
especially
know,
because I studied
as we
dictatorship, so I've got the home
right,
court advantage.
right, or as we regress to primitive times, anthropology with the candidacies that we have here. So uh, Donald Trump definitely kind of toned it down last night. He's now looking to heal the wounds that he opened. What's your view on this political silly season here? And do you think that Hillary Clinton, once we talk about Trump, I want to move to the Democrats, and do you think that she's could be haunted should she get the nomination by what's happening with the FBI giving immunity to one of her associates?
Do you want me to answer this now? Are we live now?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, great.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Trump toning it down, this is a pattern that honestly a lot of more authoritarian leaders have followed in the past, where they, use rhetoric to rile people up. And a lot of people have been saying, well, Trump doesn't really mean what he says. He's just using that to get votes, which I find disturbing in and of itself. If you're willing to say things like that that have caused actual physical attacks on people, then perhaps that's not a sign that you're the kind of person who should be elected, whether or not you're sincere about them. I mean, I do feel you're sincere. I think that, if you're not sincere, you wouldn't be so careless as to say things like that. In terms of Hillary, it's very hard to kind of parse, whether the FBI thing or the, threat of a looming indictment is legitimate. Hillary, has had a lot of issues, but a lot of them have been witch hunts. It's been 25 years of this. It's been very difficult for anybody to really pin anything on her in a meaningful way that stops her campaign rise. So I have a feeling that, much like her other scandals of the past, this will not have
Whitewater.
a consequence in terms of her. Yeah, Whitewater, Vince Foster. I mean, I'm in my 30s, and I can't remember a time before Hillary Clinton was the target of some sort of scandal. I think that this will blow over in the sense of any kind of legal ramifications, but the taint to it, the kind of feeling that Hillary Clinton is not someone you can trust, that she's somebody who's going to bring a lot of obstacles should she be elected. I think that's real, and the hatred for Hillary is so powerful that I do think she'll have problems, if she gets into office. But in many ways, they're no different than the problems that any of her Democratic successors have experienced when going up against a GOP Congress.
Yeah, I'm sure Kenneth Starr, who was the chief prosecutor of the Clintons during Whitewater, is doing cartwheels over this possible email scandal. And, when it comes to Hillary, I'm a trader. I remember a story, it was back in the 80s, where she made $100,000 in the live cattle market, and she
Mm-hmm.
attributed it to, she read an article in the Wall Street Journal. So if it was that
Right.
easy, and then later on her broker was indicted for misappropriating trades, where he would do a block order of trades, and to his favorite customers, they would get the good ones. And to the people he
Right.
had zero relationships with or didn't care about, they'd get the losers. So that's something I haven't been able to get over. With
Right.
yes, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, and I just made $1 million in gold. So interesting that we have both possible candidates in each party having the highest number of unpopularity in the history of
Yes.
the U.S. How can
Yeah.
that play? So that plays to our nature, not our best natures, but our worst natures, how does something like this play out? And I know you weren't around for Whitewater, but I know you've studied. Does this time period remind you at all, Sarah, of what was happening in the 30s when the right and the left rose and there was very little left in the middle?
Do you mean in terms of American politics or just world history in general?
Yeah, well, you know, we had the New Deal. It was pretty left here in the U.S. We had fascism in Europe. We had the
Right.
beginning of communism, the Russian Revolution. So during that time frame, there was a big move to polarities, left, right.
Right.
It's happening in Europe, isn't it? I mean, because of the immigration crisis, you're seeing a lot of
Right.
right leadership, nationalistic leaders coming to power. Um, this, to me, is not a good sign for being optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is, the ramifications of two things. One is that these kind of vicious partisan divisions have been with us much longer. I mean, I think they really hit their stride in the 90s under Clinton's administration, and, like you said, with Kenneth Starr and the impeachment. This has been going on for a long time. The antagonism, towards Hillary, you just cut out, but hopefully you can hear me.
I'm here. I'm here.
Has been going on. Okay. Has been going on for a long time, and that same sort of partisan rancor has raised its head during the Obama administration, particularly in the rise of the Tea Party. What distinguishes now, I think, from the 90s and those previous disagreements is that this is a time of extreme economic desperation that I think has been underplayed by the media. The recovery of the recession has not been equal. I think because the media is situated in cities that have recovered in a better way, like New York or DC, they don't necessarily see the extent of suffering that people are facing in their everyday lives. I'm speaking now from St. Louis, which has in no way recovered from the recession. I know many people who are working, part-time jobs, contingent jobs, or no job at all. And so people are very angry. They're very frustrated. I think people have lost trust in institutions to fix anything. And so, what you're left with are two candidates who, as you've noted, are both powered by money and by a long legacy of interaction on the U.S. political sphere and decades of cultivating both fandom and extreme hatred. I can't think of two candidates who are more hated than Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and the fact that they're likely to be the two nominees for this election does not bode well. I think you're just going to have a lot of very unhappy people. I think this has always been an election where people are kind of seeking to vote against the lesser of the two evils. And when you're delivered those two candidates, people are kind of at a loss. I personally think that Donald Trump's rhetoric and background and inexperience in terms of actually delegating in a political level distinguishes him from Clinton. I think he's an extremist. I think he's a racist. I think he's truly dangerous. Whereas Hillary has a background that links her to corruption, and to questionable decisions she made during her time as Secretary of State and in the Senate. But it's different. However, I think on an emotional level, which is how most people respond and vote, the feelings that these two candidates bring out in people are just venomous. They're extreme, and it's very hard to predict what people will do. I kind of wonder whether many people will want to sit this election out, or whether they're going to go just to make sure that the other nominee does not get in there. Like, for example, I know in Missouri,
I vote B that there'll be plenty of that. There'll be plenty.
Yeah,
of that.
In Missouri, our primary is next week, and it's an open primary like Michigan. And I know plenty of Democrats who, who were able to vote early and kind of unwisely voted for Rubio, who has no chance in hell. But they were doing that just to try to keep Trump from going out. And so there's a lot of this kind of strategic maneuvering among the voters that could lead to very unpredictable results. I think that's part of the reason that the Michigan polls were wrong. I also think the pollsters are very out of touch with the American people, both in terms of understanding what they're going through, but also their techniques. They're polling through landlines. Like, I don't know anybody under 40 who has a landline. And so in many ways, this is going to be an unpredictable election, run by and powered by extreme emotional reactions to political rhetoric.
That's a great point that you made about many in the country being left behind. I can speak from personal experience that I worked twice as hard for half as much. And maybe a great reality check would be, instead of having food stamps, to have soup lines, so that people could see the lines stretched out from coast to coast of the people that are just barely getting by. And you know, we're entering a phase now where the middle class has already been wiped out. People that I read and that are talking about a potential bear market in equities and risk off and deflation are now saying that the only class left to take the money away from are the rich. And what kind of economic policies, is there really any way out? And maybe even, I heard a Wall Street guy yesterday actually say that Bernie Sanders would create more money velocity than anyone else. He said that we're in a recession because for the last 15 years, wages have stagnated, but everything that you need to live has risen. So over 80% of the U.S. population has been in recession for 15 years.
Right.
Is there any way out of this mess, Sarah?
I mean, I feel like it's more acute in the last 15 years, but wage stagnation has been going on, you know, since before I was born, like since the mid 70s, and cost of living has radically risen. I think you see this.
Don't rub it in, Sarah. Don't rub it in how young you are.
I think what you see, you know, nowadays is that cost of basic things like, you know, having a baby, daycare, housing, you know, all these things except for maybe gas have risen so exponentially during a time of wage stagnation, and also a time where people are forced to work more and more hours. They're working like 60-day, you know, weeks and making less money than somebody who worked a 40-day week in the 90s. And I think people feel that really acutely. I do think that, you know, raising the minimum wage is one of the best solutions to this. You know, I support Sanders' policy of $15 an hour. I don't think that this is unrealistic. I've actually written about this pretty extensively, about the fast food strikes and, you know, low-income workers who are trying to get their wages up. That would make a huge tangible difference in people's ability to survive, and also put money back into communities that you know, have long been suffering because of wage stagnation. The question is, you know, would any corporation be willing to do this? You know, this can be a federal law or a state law, but I think that there's just, you know, businesses have people where they want them. They know that people are just desperate to survive, that they'll work whatever they can get, even if it's in terrible conditions, just to be able to feed their families. And there's not a lot of social responsibility. I don't think people are operating in good conscience. And so I think it does take some kind of, you know, governmental intervention to prevent this level of suffering. We're at the point, though, where this has been going on for such a long time. You know, meanwhile, people are like, oh, we've recovered, the economy has recovered, stocks are up, and they don't seem to understand that, like, what Wall Street does not necessarily connect with what an ordinary American is experiencing. So, like, yes, people might be doing better in the stock market, but that doesn't translate into daily life. And I think what we're seeing now is just the culmination of just decades of frustration, and especially among young people who have never known a functional economy, who've, you know, graduated into basically a permanent recession or a restructuring of the American economy. It's very different than what their parents knew, and those sort of emotions
loaded up with 6 figures of student loan debt.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you ever crawl out of a hole like that when you're 22 years old?
I have no idea.
I took out student loans, but you know, I'm 62 now, Sarah. So my student loans to Northern Illinois University totaled about $3,000. Okay, so and you know, I didn't pay that back right away. So I can only imagine what it's like for young people to have to service that type of debt. And you can't even go BK to get rid of it. So you think there'll be a law change? I know that Hillary and Bernie would like to bail out the young people in our country by possibly some debt forgiveness. You think that's a possibility if the Democrats win?
I think that's a good idea. I don't know whether it is actually something that's going to be able to get through Congress. And I think that, you know, we need to look at, you know, more local and state level as to who our representatives are and whether they're willing to pass those sorts of laws. I think that higher education in particular is the biggest bubble around. It's something that's absolutely going to implode. I mean, people cannot pay back this debt. You know, I graduated from college in the early 2000s, and the exponential difference between what people even my age are paying for college versus what young people today are paying is just incredible. Like, the tuition has tripled or quadrupled in many cases just in the last 15 years alone. So you know,
how
you're going to be
how rich are the university coffers? Because I'm sure they haven't raised their professor salaries threefold. So
no, I
where's
mean,
this tuition money going to? Football programs?
I mean, that's a great question. You know, the other thing that's risen is the number of adjunct professors who tend to be paid something like 2,000 to 2,500 a course. So professors are getting paid very little. You know, I have a PhD. Most people in my cohort are working in these sort of temp jobs, just like, you know, any other low-wage worker in America. It doesn't make a difference if they have a PhD. So the professors aren't getting the money. A lot of the money is going towards building up administration, creating all these positions, you know, these, you know, deans and stuff that don't necessarily need to be there. It also, as you said, is going into sports. It's going into paying university presidents absurdly large salaries, like millions of dollars. And, you know, and so the higher ed economy, I think, reflects the broader American economy, where a lot of money is going to certain people at the top, and the majority of workers are really getting nothing. What I'm curious will happen is what people, you know, my age and a little older are going to do about sending their kids to college. Because, you know, on one hand, they can't afford it. They're still paying back their own student loans, so they can't pay for their kids. But they're also, I think, starting to question, like, is this degree really worth anything? You know, people who went and sacrificed and took out loans and got a degree and got a job have found that that job just doesn't pay very much. It doesn't pay enough to survive. And of course, you're at a disadvantage if you don't have a college degree. But I think that there's just, you know, that's an area where you're going to see some real frustration, because people are just trapped. They want the best for their children. They have no idea how to get it. They want their children to have a good future. They don't see it happening. And I think that level of panic, you know, is contributing to a lot of vitriol we see in the race, and also to some of the policy positions. You see people like Sanders, and to a lesser degree Clinton, advocating, because they know that this just cannot go on like this without, you know, something imploding, and that implosion might be Trump. So, you know, they should take note of that.
Talking about implosions, I know you cover economic issues, and Mario Draghi yesterday, it's the second time in less than a year he's come out, and during a press conference, the desired result he's wanted for Europe has backfired. And yesterday was a huge backfire. Up until this year, Sarah, it seemed like people truly believed that central bankers and central planners were omnipotent, and they had everyone's back on risk. And this year it seems like the emperor has no clothes. I think that you notice, and in your writings and in your contacts, that people are becoming more and more skeptical of what delivered a reflation of asset prices in equities and real estate no longer being effective, and being as confused as any analyst on the street that the Fed is a confused body.
Yeah, I mean, this is not my main area of expertise, you know, the financial markets, in part because I tend to talk to people who really have nothing invested in them. So what happens there doesn't affect them as much. But I think just since, you know, the 2008 financial collapse, you see a lot of, you know, hesitation and anger and skepticism about the validity of Wall Street, about whether these investments are real. You know, people who were hurt, especially in the foreclosure crisis, feel this way. So I think that a lot of sentiment from sort of the bottom, you know, rungs of society, people who were kind of just screwed without understanding what they were getting into, maybe is trickling up into people with actual financial expertise and who work in the market industry, and they're feeling the same thing. I mean, I think that there is the sense that, you know, the center does not hold, as Yeats said. I mean, that poem's been reverberating around the internet for good reason. And you know, if it's getting into that level, I think we're in for something very bad. And I think that those sorts of conditions favor a candidate like Trump. Like, kind of going back to what you said earlier about whether this mirrors previous eras, I do think that this mirrors the era of the 1930s, and that a candidate who just kind of assures people that, you know, jobs will come back, things will be okay, everything is good, and that also we have a lot of enemies, both internal and external, who are responsible for this. And I think many of those enemies that Trump lists are absolutely not the people at fault, is appealing, you know, to a lot of people. People are just, they're desperate. They want things to be better, and they don't necessarily care how that comes about.
Okay, well, you know, one of the result of this type of political shift in the 30s was followed by World War II. And
Yeah.
you know, you were named as someone that could make sense of global events, and there are a lot of different pots on the oven percolating that could lead to a shooting war. And
Right.
what keeps you up at night in 2016? Is it Putin and possibly Turkey getting into a skirmish? Could it be the new war is going to be cyber terrorism? The Russians were accused of knocking out the power grid in Kazakhstan, something like that. I interviewed John McAfee. He's worried about a cyber war, that we're already in one. And
Mm.
what's happening in China with, you know, normally when economies begin to suffer, sometimes war follows.
Right.
And they are being pretty aggressive in the South China Sea. So why don't you try and make sense of what's happening with multiple wars in the Middle East, and what's happening with the migration crisis? There's just so much that at times I think on television I'm watching Revelations.
Yeah, no, it's especially since 2014, it's been a lot. And the examples you listed in particular, Russia and Turkey, and their move to growing authoritarianism, I think are important. I think there's a worldwide move towards authoritarian leadership, and you also see this in terms of who's gaining popularity in Europe and how those leaders are responding to the migrant crisis. I think, the center of this war is Syria, and the Syrian refugee crisis, and how that's impacting different places. ISIS also comes into play, and that's a troubling issue because ISIS is not geographically centered. I mean, they have certain bases in Iraq and in Syria, but really they're a global organization. They're the key players are often from places like Belgium or France, or even the United States. And so when Trump is saying let's send 30,000 ground troops to go fight ISIS, you're kind of like, well, where are you going to go? There's so many different possibilities. I think that Trump points to leaders like Putin as, exemplars of strength. I think that any kind of authoritarian leader that's behaving in the way Putin did, invading Ukraine, is actually operating from a position of weakness and a desire to build his reputation on the domestic front by threatening people internationally. And I think that the same thing could very well happen in the United States. I feel like to some degree that's what happened during the Bush administration when we invaded Iraq. I think it was a feeling of vulnerability, both from what at the time seemed like a big economic problem, the recession of 2001, which is just pales in comparison to everything that's happened since, but also, of course, understandable fear and vulnerability after the World Trade Center attacks. And when you have people in this position of panic, in the sense of like we're losing our strength as a nation, we're losing our control over our lives, they make very rash and aggressive decisions. And when you have so many world leaders in the same position, with their economies suffering, with their people feeling disaffected, with a lot of resentment and anger being expressed towards immigrants and migrants, when all that's happening simultaneously in so many different countries, like I do think that there's the potential for international warfare. In terms of the United States' participation, I think people are very just beaten down by the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. They don't want to return to them because they were such a financial drain and such an emotional, heartbreaking drain for American people, and especially for American soldiers and those who have connections to what those soldiers went through. So I don't think there's a real appetite for war.
They fought for Fallujah and spilled their blood on ground, Sarah, that is now controlled by ISIS, or by
Yeah.
the Shia, which are the Iranians. Which brings me to what were your thoughts prior to the Iranian nuclear accord, and what are they now with recent missile tests that on the side of the missile says in Hebrew, Israel should be wiped off the earth?
Yeah,
Was
I
that a
mean,
good deal? And Trump talks about, all the Republicans talk about tearing up that agreement, but it's a little too late. 150 billion has already left the chute that is in Iranian hands now. You worry about
I
that?
think I do worry about that because I don't feel that the Iranian regime is trustworthy for a large number of reasons. I do think that a lot of consideration was put into this deal. You know, Obama always plays the long game. I do think he thinks things through. I don't think he makes rash decisions as many of his predecessors did. You know, and there's also a long tradition of Iranian rhetoric being very violent, very inflammatory, and not necessarily being followed through in action. You know, a lot of what they're saying isn't really for our benefit. It's to, you know, for Iranians in Iran to hear, you know, this sort of tough rhetoric and this very anti-American rhetoric. And so it's hard to tell how much that rhetoric will be put into action. I actually don't think, you know, Iran is our biggest problem. I'm more concerned, you know, with authoritarianism and also with just sort of collapse in places like Syria and the potential for that to be, well, it is a terrorist stronghold, so it's not even potential. I think that's of concern, and also, you know, what kind of leader we're going to elect. You know, everyone's kind of flip-flopped back and forth about the need for intervention, the need, you know, the appeal of warfare, but it's very hard to tell. You know, if you recall, George Bush campaigned as a, you know, anti-interventionist, as someone who would never go into another country and who wanted kind of the U.S. to have this, you know, hands-off position, and then of course we end up in two giant wars, and so it's very hard to predict what will happen. If there's another terrorist attack in the United States, I absolutely think we'll be thrown into this mess, and I think, you know, we've been trying to avoid it, but we wouldn't be able to in that kind of situation, and things can go very rapidly downhill because we do not have the economic power we used to have. We don't have the trustworthy reputation that I think we have. We don't have a decade of peace behind us as we did, you know, when 9/11 happened, and it was after the 90s, and we had some, you know, Somalia and Kosovo and other, you know, military problems, but nothing as large in scale as Iraq and Afghanistan. And so we're weaker now. I mean, that's true. Like, I dispute what Trump says, but what he says and what Sanders says about our country being in bad shape, like, they're both right about that. And that's a problem when all these other countries are experiencing the same difficulties that we are.
You know, Sarah, I used to be able to bench press 315. I'm weaker now, too, at 62. But I wanted to, we're talking about a future president, but everything that we've talked about, Obama being elected, people were so hopeful that there was going to be change, that they'd be lifted up. And doesn't a lot of this fall at his doorstep, that he wasn't the cause of this wealth disparity, but nothing really changed? In fact, it was only exacerbated under the last 8 years of his administration.
Yeah, I think both those things are true. I don't really think this is Obama's fault. I can't recall a president who inherited a worse situation, both in terms of the, you know, the crash happening right before he was elected, and also inheriting 2 wars. I mean, that's just a terrible thing. He also had the most hostile Congress that I think any president has ever had. So it's been very difficult for him, you know, to push things through. And that situation won't change regardless who's elected. I think part of the problem, though, is, you know, that people just don't understand the depth of the despair, and, you know, because I think certain parts of the country are covered in the media more than others, there's this illusory sense that things have gotten better. You know, if you look at the unemployment numbers, they're low, but they often don't take into account people who've left the workforce entirely, or who are working, you know, very bad minimum wage jobs that don't pay their bills. And so I think that this crisis has been kind of underreported, and, you know, what you're seeing now is a populist uprising from people who have been dealing with this for so long that they've just given up hope in institutions. I don't think people have any trust in institutions at all. You know, they've seen Obama and others try to fix the situation and fail. You know, not necessarily their own fault, but they did fail. You know, we're not really better off than we were 8 years ago. You know, we're barely holding it together, and I think that terrifies people, because even if you want things to be better, which I do think Obama sincerely did, he couldn't pull it off. He could not, you know, have the power to pull that off.
Okay, that's a key point. You bring up a key point. The media and every U.S. citizen is so focused on the presidential race that really what is key is what comes out of what type of Congress and Senate that we have in this election. Because the president, just like Obama, if it's Trump and he doesn't have the Congress, he's going to have thank God, have some difficulty getting 35% tariffs passed, etc. What do you think the outcome could be in the U.S. Senate and the Congress in this type of political season, do you think control remains the same type of divided government, or is there a chance for a shift for one party to really dominate the whole political scene?
I think it's very hard to tell, and that's in part because both on the GOP and the Democratic side, people keep kind of reversing their positions. There's a lot of Republican opposition to Trump, and there were initially a lot of people saying, I would never support this guy, I would never work with this guy, and now you're starting to see all those people come around. You're seeing endorsements from previous candidates like Carson and Christie. You're seeing different, GOP representatives speaking up and saying that they support Trump, and so it really depends on whether people are going to, what they think is strategically advantageous for them. Like, is it better for them in terms of how they appear to their constituency and in terms of how they want to govern to go along with Trump and to embrace, some of his insane policies? Or are they going to work together in some sort of coalition fashion to oppose him? And I think also you may see, more Democrats being elected in more statewide or local elections because of fear of Trump, because they want some kind of opposition to him should he come into power. But it's very hard to tell because there are also, people sincerely like Trump. Like, this is not an illusion. There are plenty of people who are very gung-ho about this, and they would want representatives that will carry his policies through. And so you're going to have that contingent out voting, and they're voting, it seems, in record high numbers in certain states. Yes. And, that's something we also have to contend with. A lot of people really want this, and, that scares me, and I understand where they're coming from. I don't think it's the right way to go. I don't think Trump is the solution to the problems, but the problems are real. You can't deny that.
So, Sarah, all I could say is what Donald used to say on his television show, The Apprentice: be afraid, be very afraid. And I want to thank you for making the effort to make sense out of this political season and what's happening in the globe. Very good attempt to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense to me. And I guess we're just going to watch things unfold and do our best to survive, protect our families, and hopefully the American way of life, which I think we're going to need a reset. There's going to be a cleansing flood. Let's hope that we are all on the lifeboat to see what the country looks like on the other side of this. And I want to thank you for your time. I hope so. I want to thank you for your time. It's a pleasure meeting you. I recommend that people follow you at Sarah Kendzior. That's your Twitter handle. Anywhere else people could stay in touch with your writings and your views, Sarah?
You can check my website, which is sarahkendzior.com. I also write sometimes for the Globe and Mail, for the Guardian, and for some other places, but my website tends to house links to everything. So
I hope that your future is bright and that someone recognizes your value and pays you what you're worth, even in these economic times.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Have a great weekend, Sarah. Nice meeting you.
You too. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. That was Sarah Kendzior, everyone. You could follow Sarah at Sarah Kendzior. I thought it was an excellent interview. She has a great smile, too. That doesn't hurt, Everyone looks better when they smile and they look happy. Correct? So what's happening in the markets, my friends? We're getting ready to wrap up the week here. I noticed someone is saying gold was flying. Are we back to the third drive line in gold? No, gold's coming off, okay? WTI coming off a little. So, just U.S. dollar took a rapid big dip, okay? Getting a little bit of a failing rally in euro. Nothing I really see there. How's the yen holding up during all of this? Yen still looks like it has upside. Canada divergence. We're getting a tail on the Canada. If it was a Monday or Tuesday, I'd be trying Canada here, but I'm not going to. Euro pound, I still think sets up. This might be the right shoulder. I'm going to be looking for some shorting opportunities. So this is my wrap up. Aussie got to the third drive line, a little bit too much momentum up here. We're getting closer, but pretty good momentum. So this is what I was talking about, Tozen. Sometimes markets can break through and even close above the wedge line, which gold has not done. Pound has filled the gap and continues to head up. Nice call by, I think, it may have been Mystic that was long. No, it was Goldie that was long the pound. So did everyone have a good week? You guys want to let me go a little early? So I think the best song to end it with is You Ain't Nothing But a Drawdown, because I'm sure yesterday, I know most of us were unscathed by what happened yesterday, but I believe a lot of people may have gotten hurt yesterday. I was emotional and got out of my natural gas long ETF, which is 9 cents higher, left $1,000 on the table. GKFX. Never heard of them. So I want to thank everyone for making this another great week in LAR. Everyone notice how we're growing. About a month or several months ago would mainly only be about 2 or 3 at the most, a handful of Larians showing their work every day. You know, Ricardo and Armand and Alien. And look at how many different people have stepped up to start showing their work. There's so much more content in LAR. Over the last few months, we've attracted some excellent new traders to our community. I really believe that we have something unique and special here. So if you had a little drawdown this week, really don't worry about it. Just recharge over the weekend, go over your weekly charts, write down your key technical areas. If you're still in a trade that you believe in, that perhaps you're taking a little heat on, all I could say is this. You ain't nothing but a drawdown and a margin call. You ain't nothing but a drawdown and a margin call. But I ain't scared, 'cause I still believe the call. Never said I was perfect, 'cause that would be a lie. Never said I was perfect, 'cause that would be a lie. So why don't you go home and check your charts? I'm saying goodbye. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Because it ain't nothing but a drawdown. See everyone Monday. Enjoy. Recharge. And remember, most of all, my friends, my trading warrior brothers and sisters, don't just count your pips. Count your blessings. And I count all of you as one. See you next week. Adios.